Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is Zeke Freeman. Now, Zeke is an architect, a developer, and also in real estate. He is based in Denver, Colorado, and his company is Root Architecture and Development. Zeke has some fascinating projects that he works on, and he's a man of action. Like, he's got a lot going on. Zeke, welcome to Talk Design, and I'm really looking to digging into some of your history and story and also what you're currently working on, which is super, super exciting.
Adrian, my pleasure. Looking forward to chat with you again.
Yeah, man. Hey, let's kick off with my usual question that I start just about every podcast with, which is, at some point you were this little boy that was running around, and how did you even realize that architecture was a thing? Like, where did this come into your life? Because, I've had guests who have said, oh, they were at uni and they had to choose something, and they went down and they read architecture and they thought, I know what that maybe is. I'll just choose that so everybody gets off my back. And I've had other ones who go, fourth generation. So what was your story with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's kind of timely because I was just got back this weekend from visiting my hometown in East Texas. And I grew up in a small town outside of Dallas on a little lake. It's called Club Lake.
Oh, what
Lake?
Club Lake.
Club Lake. Yeah.
Man-made, or
it was probably a man-made lake. It was there since the 1920s. My father was the caretaker of this lake when we first moved out there. I was probably 5 years old, and I remember driving around on the boat that we kind of took care of all of the ecosystem and wildlife. If we had migratory bird problems that were eating all the fish, we would get up and we would, drive them off the lake. If we had a need to grow, a new fish population, like we had these ponds and tanks that we would grow these fish in, and remember draining the ponds and pulling out all of the catfish and the crappie and dragging them up into the lake. And probably the funnest part is there'd be, these huge bullfrogs left inside these muddy tanks. And, we would go around and grab all of these big giant bullfrogs and, play with them as kids. And it was just an idyllic place to grow up as a kid in East Texas. At some point, my dad moved from being the caretaker to, we called it the north end of the lake, and he took on a job as a property manager across a bunch of camps in East Texas. And he moved our family of 6 into this 1-bedroom little cabin in the north end, which was great. It was like Tom Sawyer because, we're all like stacked on top of each other and elbows in each other's face. But the greatest thing is, like, the north end didn't have any houses where all the rest of the lake did. And so, I spent our childhood just running around, on the lake, and, it was pretty much our, playground. And so my entire childhood, this cabin, we began to build a shell over the cabin into, a nice, like, normal, 3-bed, 2-bath. And so, as we grew from, like, 4 or 5-year-olds, teenagers, the girl and the family, my sister got a bedroom first.
Yeah.
And then, the boys got we shared another room, but you had to build your bedroom. It was kind of the deal. And it was an ongoing, like 15-year project that we were always just building something. And it was, dad would build this kind of on the side, and, we were, free slave labor. And so we were just learning, construction is just what you did on your weekends. And along the way, he's making a living doing property management of these different camps. And as a teenager, I would go with him to the different camps, and there was always a construction project going on. So I spent a lot of the summers. One of our really fun projects we did out at this camp called Camp Betty Pro in East Texas was this big treehouse, a series of tree houses that went out on these platforms. And he had gotten a grant from Betty Perot, which was Ross Perot's sister.
Yeah, I was about to ask that.
Yeah, to build out this project. And so she flew in on a helicopter and dropped into this camp, and dad pitched this big, wild idea, and we were going to have the great big, tree was going to be the entry, and and then we'd, out into the forest, we'd do these platforms, and then we'd do a big stage across the back. And he was just wild. And, he made things happen, and he'd pick up a hammer and we'd go do it. And so that was just the way of life. And there was no permits, and there was no, you just, you got some funding, you got an idea, and you went out and you did it.
Wasn't that a simpler time?
It was. And fast forward, here we are, 30 years later, and I'm been in Colorado, in Denver, running a design and architecture practice, almost 20 years doing that. And most of our time, we were just talking before, is, really set through all of the, getting through the permitting process, and, all the regulations that you have to do things. And just, you just kind of got to keep all the wheels spinning, and we'll probably get into it.
And the bills paid.
Yeah, and the bills paid and all of that. And so we've been working on this, we'll get into the hotel a little bit. We've been working on that one for a couple of years just to get to start. And so this last weekend, I actually went back down to East Texas. It was my grandfather's memorial service. And so that was a special time, went down, and I got to talk at that a little bit and share some memories. But while I was down there, and I don't do a lot of work in Texas anymore, but someone had reached out about doing a landscape hotel. And I said, well, I'll do it if we could do it on this same weekend that I'm going to be down there, and we'll make that work. And so that worked out really nice. And so Friday I was down there, and, we're walking, their big new 60-acre sublot. And I totally, completely stole your land whispering. I hope you don't mind. I was like, I didn't really know how to do it, so I was just making things up. I was like, I think he takes two sticks and he puts it together, and you just listen.
You got to put your ear on the tree as well.
You put your ear on the tree, and then you talk like Crocodile Dundee, and I'm pretty sure the land will start to tell us what we need to do here.
Every time.
And so that was fantastic. Like it was, they had 3 ponds. And so, walked around. Oh, this is going to be great, because we're going to create a place for, families to be able to come, and they'll be able to come and fish, when they.
So you were just being your dad. You were talking to Betty and going, I can imagine.
Yeah. Well, I've always stole bits and pieces of him, and, we're 2 peas in a pod. And I've never actually done a project since I started my architecture firm with my dad. But this piece of property was only 10 minutes down the road from my dad. And so I called him up. I was like, Dad, you got to come do this one with me. I mean, this would be perfect. You could, he's still a builder, and he runs a landscape construction company. I was like, this is right up your alley. Let's go land whisper, and we'll put this deal together. So he came with me, and we had a blast, just walking across, looking at the creeks and imagining, like, we can position, the cabins here. And by this, she wanted to put the cabins up front. We're like, I can still kind of hear the road. Let's explore the land a little bit more further. And let's listen. And the best part of listening is, like, is sometimes not hearing anything. And so as we got further out into the woods, it was like, oh, this is it. Like, can you imagine, like, there's a creek running through here, that drowns out the road noise. We're further enough back, you can start to hear the, birds start to hang here.
Yeah.
The access would be easier to come in on along this edge. They'd already kind of cut in some, along the fence line where they would clear the property. So it's like, we could run a road back in here. It's like, oh yeah, this is much better. This is good.
Isn't it really amazing how easy it is to do the obvious without the explanation of going and digging and finding where the magic might lie, otherwise, like, that kind of, I don't know, I think that there's a magnetic piece that draws you to something else when you actually just take your time and walk and just, and then there's always the overlay. There's always I say the overlay, like, we'll have a fire zone. We'll have a slip zone. We'll have a koala corridor. We'll have a platypus habitat. We'll have a native tree protection order. We'll have whatever it is. There'll be something that will define some of the common sense of it. I think of Tom Kundig saying, for common sense to prevail, common things need to happen, and it's, I go, that rings in my ears, what's the common sense approach here? And then kind of discarding all the boundaries of, if there was none of that, if there was no boundary, what could really happen? If we weren't in a fire zone, what could happen? If we weren't in a whatever, what could happen? What would our opportunities be? And then going, okay, how can I take that energy that's really exciting and creative and pull that into an energetic space that maybe isn't quite as strong, but I've got that to drag forward in the design kind of idea. I love that part. That to me is one of the most fun parts of all design.
I love that. I think probably this idea of like common sense architecture is a bit of a lost art. Yeah. And then again, like, I love going back to the roots of East Texas. Is like, in some ways, operating in urban areas, you have a lot of rules and regulations that you're bound by, and for good reason, or good intent. Maybe start with that. Lots of times you're trying to set up a rule that you don't want to put shadows on the neighbor's yard so they can be able to grow, their greenery. But what is the complexity that causes? This morning I was walking a job site, and it's a urban lot. It's got a 3-foot side setback, and the lot is sloped purely to the back. And midway, we needed to put an egress window, and that egress window is 3 foot deep and goes all the way to the property line. So there's no way water is gonna go all the way to the back. And so they have this rule that water shouldn't be allowed to flow onto your neighbor's property. And okay, good intent, like they're trying not to create a situation where you're flooding your neighbor's yard. But there's a lot of ways that can handle that. Like, you can put a swale that could run where the water naturally runs. You could put in a drainage pipe. What made sense on this lot, the developer was developing both lots, was to put the swale right down the center where we have the fence and just let the water flow on back. And that's reality what they're going to do. But there's no way that was going to get through permitting. There's no way like logic was going to prevail, because they have these rules with good intent, but it's just it's not logical. You juxtapose that to going back to East Texas, and I walked into their permitting office, and I asked them, okay, and me with this just like mindset of 20 years of like regulation rules, here's what we do, here's what we do. It's like, okay, well, what does the planning process look like? What are the different departments? What are, who we need to start to work through the permits? And they're like, well, are you in the city or in the county? Like, it'll be in the county. You can do whatever you want. Show permit.
I was about to say, I discovered that I was in Austin, and I was like, went to this house, and it was owned by this guy who was an Apple executive at some point. And anyway, his name was Sean, really neat guy. And anyway, I'm walking around his house, and I'm asking him questions. I'm asking the a guy called David Weber was the architect. I'm asking them both questions about this house. And I'm going, so why is that different from, like I'd just been at other houses where it would seem that these guys were just flaunting the rules like wildly. And David says to me, and Sean says to me, see the road? He goes, that's Travis, Austin or whatever, city limit, whatever. And this is Travis County. There is no rule here. And I'm like, what do you mean there's no rule here? And he goes, well, over there we'd be outlaws, but over here we're just settlers. And I'm like, how does that work? And they're like, well, that's all totally governed by the city. And on this side here, this road is the county line. This side here, we have a completely looser set of rules. Now, we've still got to build properly. We can't just flaunt the building, but we don't have all these other rules that are going to govern us. And that's why they were saying to me, that's why on this side of the road, there's all these big blocks of land, because these people on this side, whereas on the other side, it's all developed land and it's all under like county rules or city rules. I'm like, yeah, right. So you want to build out of county, but across county line.
Yeah. I mean, here's the deal though, right? It's, then common sense architecture becomes so much more important, where, in the city, we begin to get relied on, did the building permit or planning officials approve this? It was like, wow, yeah, maybe they did it or not, but does it make it good architecture? In the county where, it's America like America was meant to be, or as wild and as free. And, you have the ability to create something really amazing and beautiful that you've listened to the land, thought about, your personal freedoms, as well as how do I want to be a neighbor,
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I don't flush a whole bunch of water onto my neighbor because he might come shoot me with a shotgun.
That's yeah. The realities of it.
Yeah, it's like, all right, you still want to be a good neighbor. You still want to, think about, the sun and how the water flows and where the noise matters and, what is the opportunities to take advantage of and the views and the light. And you can do something really beautiful. And some of the best architecture is done, in those rural counties around East Texas, South Texas. Look at the work that Lake Flato is doing. It's on these big ranches, and, they're just thoughtfully nestled into the land.
Yeah,
that's some of the architecture. Yeah. But then some of the worst architecture is in East Texas, and in these rural counties as well, because without the regulations, they're coming in, they're stacking RVs from one side to the next, and Hillbilly Bob is stacked up 10 cars across this front, and next to a beautiful mansion, and so again,
it's like a catch-22, isn't it? It's
catch
like
22. But it just raises the importance of what we do.
100%. The other thing that happens is you're less likely to find en masse developments where everything's just cookie cutter. You do, like as much as you've got Hillbilly Bob with, 10 Cadillacs in a row and each of them's a bedroom, and there's a campfire in the middle kind of thing or whatever. That brings texture and it brings personality. And it brings something to it, as much as it takes something from, my pristine, sidewalk, my pristine developed community with X number of trees per whatever it is, and every front facade has to be within these kind of zones, and just those things, whether somebody's closer to the road or further back from the road or whatever. I know the joy of driving, not driving, but being in a city like, say, Paris or something like that, where they were planned cities to a large degree. And there is something about the harmony and the rhythm and the way it works. And the surprises kind of stand out because everything else kind of fits. And then you see something really creative and you go, oh, wow, that's amazing. Like they do stand out there. When you're in the country like that, though, everything has the ability to stand out, but you've got to take them in pieces, like little pieces, I enjoy that so much. I think that's what draws me to, as you say, this kind of common sense, organic, the idea of it. Again, referencing Tom Kundig, he calls it hot rodding. You've got to take something old and ugly or whatever, and you've got to do what you can do with it. And I like that kind of idea of that when you're out there in those, we'll call it the Wild West. When you're out there in that Wild West, you get to hot rod and you get to bring all these things that you wouldn't get to bring on a city block. You were saying about the water. We've got a rule that says we're not allowed to discharge water onto our neighbor's property. Yeah. So we have another rule right where I live. So this isn't all of Australia, if anybody is listening for this. But where I live on the Sunshine Coast, our water from our roof must go to ground or to tanks if we're going to supply our own water. Now, they don't like us to supply our own water where they have municipal water, because then we're not paying for, we're still paying for some infrastructure, but we're not using their infrastructure, which they're paying with our rates and everything else for our land taxes. But we have this discharge rule that, so I live on the side of a hill and I have a neighbor below me, and below him is a street. And I have a street above me. So I drive in off the top street and I can drive around down to the bottom street. My whole property kind of slopes towards his. And at some point there, he said to me, I get this flooding underneath my house. And if you look directly, his house is directly in front of mine, but on the right-hand side, there's an empty block of land that hasn't been developed, and it's quite steep. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what we're here. Let me think about that, what I maybe could do. Because I've got a discharge to the ground, which is healthy for the ground, but I've got a discharge there. So it builds up in my backyard piece and then rolls down a rock bank, and then it ends up under his house. And I'm like, one day I'm there and I'm looking at my guttering and stuff, and I went, if I took that downpipe, took it away from there, took it over there, took that one there, joined that one there, took that one over there, and discharged them all right on the right-hand side of my property, then the natural groundwater would actually take them down through the property that's empty. Yeah. So I did that, and it solved his problem. It creates a problem probably on the other block, but it probably spreads on the other block better. And until it's built on, there'll be no water management and then it goes directly to a culvert at the bottom. There's a culvert right by the bottom of this other property. So it all kind of collects in there anyway. But it's fascinating, this discharging, and like you say, they're saying, okay, you can't put it there. You can't, they want you to stop even runoff into there. So you've got to I've worked on some amazing projects where we've had runoff like you've never seen. And there was one job where we built a $40,000 sluice drain just to pick up the runoff from the street above and the property behind them. And when that property would flood, then it would come into their property and so on. Yeah. But then it gave us other other council problems to discharge that much water. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. One of my first internships was with Lake Flato Architects. And they did a lot of these big ranches, and their version of common sense architecture, they called it just ranch tech. The old ranchers, they would, use, things like old oil pipes to build their barns out of, and, weld solid, horseshoes for door handles. And it was just, smart common sense things. And, with the water retention, a lot of the building designs would be these big sloped overhangs to allow for coverage of your windows below. And then that created a lot of area runoff to siphon that down to water storage tanks. And there's, two scenarios and two projects that I worked on. One, we used that water storage tank to create like a little microclimate, and it held in the middle of the courtyard and kind of cooled that courtyard as it would evaporate. Great common sense use of, that water retention and creating a little micro environment. Another one was literally a barn, and they just used it as water retention for, feeding the cows. So the cows would come up, and, they've been doing that for years. It's like common sense architecture. So I thought that was a great idea, and I would try that when I came up to Colorado to, let's just use some common sense and, design a beautiful house, ran the water into a retention pond, was going to create this microclimate, and one of my early projects, and they're submitted to say, oh no, you can't retain water in Colorado. I'm like, really? No, that's illegal. You gotta let that flow down. And, come to find out, we sold all of our water rights to Texas. So we can't put
Is that true?
down in the States.
Is that true?
It's absolutely true.
So,
Absolutely.
Grizzly, Denver's a mile high, so everything's flowing towards the Gulf. I used to say the Gulf was the Gulf of America for the first time. I don't even know that that's happened. Yeah, it's flowing down towards there. So,
We're like the giant battery for the entire country, the Rocky Mountains. We have all of our snowpack.
Yeah.
And, that snowpack is what keeps a lot of, the states like California and Texas watered, throughout the seasons of the year. And, over time, water rights have been, sold off to the states downstream from us. And so although most of it is generated, here in the Rocky Mountains, most of it is owned downstream. I mean, I even recently did a project where there was a large pond on this, we called it a whiskey tango campground, because this guy had just kind of been out there doing whatever he wanted. And, he had this pond that he would let people fish out of. Well, when our clients bought it, the first thing they got slapped on was Colorado Water Department said, well, that pond is illegal, even though it'd been there for 80 years, because he hadn't pulled the proper permits or water rights for that. And so your choices are to pay a big fine and get the permits to be able to have your pond, or you have to fill it in.
Yeah.
And so they were going through the process of filling this pond in, and we're talking like 6 figures to keep a little pond.
Yeah.
And as we looked at it, we said, well, there's another river water feature over here. If we fill in this pond, then we could create all these additional cabin sites, and it really opens up the use for the land. So that's option, that's an option. You got to pay to fill all that in, or you could pay the state, keep the pond. And by the time they did the performance and ran the numbers, it was cheaper to fill the pond in than to pay their fees and keep that pond in place. And their theory is it evaporates water, and it's just, it's water's the new gold up in Colorado. Like if you have it, you hold on to it. If you don't, you're coming for it.
Well, that's a bit like, Australia, and obviously there's lots of water rights and stuff like that. We have things like the Murray River and stuff like that, there's all these farm rights that draw off these things. But again, water's the gold here, even more than America. Like this is, if there's a country that doesn't have enough resource of one thing, it's water. It's Australia and it's water. It's so dry. You get out in the center of the desert and stuff, and it's like, it makes America look lush. It's got 2 coastal kind of things, and the West Coast is nowhere near as lush as the East Coast. The East Coast is your tropical kind of, but then when you get out in the middle, man, it's real desert for a long way.
I bet.
And then there's no mountain range. There's no mountain ranges in Australia. There is high hills, and they would call them mountains, but there's no Rocky Mountains. There's no, the continental divide, how in America, how it kind of catches it on one side, catches on the other, and then it sort of spreads back.
Yeah. And then it flows out. I used to get really gift for America. Yeah. I mean, it's a gift because you get to ski in places like Steamboat, but it's also this gift because it's it's that battery that keeps, a lot of the states, flowing throughout the off season. So I think it's one of the things that makes America special, is Rocky Mountains.
Undoubtedly, like it makes such a, you go all the way up to the Tetons and all this whole kind of zone through there that, as you say, it's like this battery that keeps America alive. It feeds all that range, to the east and not so much all the way to the east, but to the west. And it sort of peters out as it gets all the way to the east. But then also that thing where it's actually running down the hill. So it's running down from you as well.
And it's super magical. I mean, as much as I've complained about, Colorado, and the regulations, one of the reasons that, the urban areas are so regulated is they've done a really good job of preserving the mountain regions and, the national parks and the state parks and the trail systems are just, they're amazing. Coming up here, you may live in town and then go out into the mountains, and I've spent decades just running trails, and I still find new trails and places to explore just because of that kind of master plan of preservation. So it's got its pros and cons, and we're here in Colorado for a reason, which also opens up lots of opportunities for beautiful architecture. So when you do get the chance to build in the mountains, it's very different than building, in Denver and the flats. Like you really do, need, and it becomes important to use that common sense architecture where you're seeing how a project, fits into the landscape and, takes advantage of views, and it becomes real important for things like entryways not to get frozen with, the north side, snowpack and all of that. So.
Have you done many heated driveways?
I've done a few of those, and they're not as expensive as you might think. Lots of times, we'll do them on as a switch. So you're turning it on maybe the morning of, and you're running it, that morning of, and that will, let that defrost. Yeah, we've got a couple of situations where like we've got a church, and really the only option was for this handicap ramp was to run it on the north side. Originally, like we would not do that if we didn't have to. But when you do, it's a human solution to fix some things. Most of the time, you want to try to use the sun. And so plan those things in a way that you're not having to do that. But there's options.
I remember driving around. This was a couple of years ago. Driving around somewhere in the mountains. I can't remember exactly where we were, and I'm like, how come that driveway is so clean, like so clear? And the neighbors have still got like snow on them. I'm looking at the sun orientation. I'm looking at the trees. I'm going, what's going on here like this? And maybe it's heated. No, nobody had ever heated driveway. I mean, I'd never come across it before. And then I was talking with a friend of mine, and who's an architect up in Seattle, and I said, I noticed this, and he's like, yeah, they heat the driveway, and I'm like, you're serious? And he's like, yeah, no, you heat the driveway because otherwise you wouldn't be able to get up it, or you wouldn't safely be able to come down it because the ice would be on it. Yeah.
Sometimes, and especially like a public, if you're doing like a ski resort or something like that, where you have real high liability. You may need to do that. For the most part, it's just sun and a shovel is okay.
Yeah. It just came to me when you were talking about, that thing of being able to work with, like you said, like with Lake Plato with their, ranch tech architecture, and the mountains has the same thing. It has this kind of, mountain tech architecture. It's like using what's available, using what's around, thinking practically about what you can do with things. And the different way it brings stuff up. I think that's the joy of architecture, really, isn't it? It's like that, being informed by your environment so much, and then being creative within that. One of the things that amazes me with architecture, I want to talk about your hotel in a minute, is my daughter was traveling in Europe recently, her first time traveling there on her own, and so she's 22, and every other day we'd be on WhatsApp with her or whatever. And she was traveling solo for a large part of it. And with that, her appreciation for suddenly how architecture forms community and how cities, because there's money spent on architecture, and whether that's ego or need or whatever, or public artworks, how that becomes the draw card for a region. So something established that city or that space first. It was a village of some sort. It made sense. It was on the crossroads or whatever. And then what grew from that And, having these conversations with her about, so that was probably somebody rich's ego that went, I want this so that I've got better than them. That's part of this driving force of, I don't want to look the same as them, or I want something that's different. I want something that's exciting, or I want this expression of who I am, and then of time and of place. And it's fascinating, when you look in, especially in Europe, where you've got cities that might be, hundreds and hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, and they've developed over this time, and then they still. I think London's a great example of this, and Paris is as well. But you can still go and build the Gherkin, you can still go and build the Shard, you can still go and build these iconic new buildings within this old buildingscape. They still have this opportunity if you're prepared to jump through the hoops enough and create something. And then how valuable that becomes as another thing to the city. Like, so somebody builds an iconic building or iconic structure of any kind, and then that actually becomes a valuable asset to the city for tourism, and for guys like you and I to go, well, we're going to go there and look at that. And we'll call ourselves professional tourists because we tax deduct it, but the rest of them just go for a look. But, we go to be inspired by it and stuff. And her traveling like that it was so interesting to see her fresh eyes on that and realizing how that built community as well and brought, all the other dynamics together, which means that we end up with regulation.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, like, that when you walk into a city, I mean, the first impression sometimes is like a static view because you just see what's there, but what you don't really realize, like, cities and urban places they're deep layers, that are built upon each other. And again, it's like, for us, it's the American spirits, it's the Wild West, Australian spirit,
Similar.
Hey, like even Denver, I watched this, beautiful presentation about how, it's Cherry Creek and the Platte River intersect. Like you were talking about, like this intersection. And, originally that's where the Indians, would set up, their campgrounds. And so there's a beautiful picture of that, where they would meet and trade. And, that logical space became kind of this center that then the railroads came through and they brought their layer of the railroads. And then, the first layer of town planning with the old, tilt up wall buildings came in and laid a grid, and that grid expanded to, different blocks of neighborhoods. And then the urban area grew up into the, right? And time goes on, and these cities become, they're not these static moments. They are these layers upon layers.
Yeah. Of living.
And that's really what makes, us as, the human species, exciting and interesting as we evolve and we come together and we create, these spaces that, we can trade and we can help improve each other. And, one person can then focus on what they're really good at in their craft, and you can trade that with another person that's really good at in their craft. And we build these spaces, but it's got to continue to evolve over time. Otherwise, it's a lot like, those ponds that if you have water flowing into them and there's nowhere to go, it becomes really stale and dingy and stagnant. You got to have on the back side of those ponds an exit that's allowing that water to flow through, and so that you're constantly getting fresh water in, and then that creates life. And so, in our effort to hold on and to preserve the past, oftentimes we're creating, stagnation. And, the past is a beautiful thing, and like it should be celebrated when you have the opportunity and you come across a beautiful building that's got amazing architecture. You should figure out how to celebrate that. And, maybe, and sometimes that means, preserving the building and restoring it. Sometimes that means, taking a component of it and, adding on to it. And sometimes that means just honoring it. It's like, hey, this space has served its life and it's time to let something else die and something else grow, and that's okay. That's like
Absolutely. That's evolution, man. Everything grows and dies, and in between often multiplies. That's
yeah,
nature. That's nature.
that's nature.
Yeah.
And that's still honoring, that history and community, because that's how those layers have been built. And the architecture that you can do, then becomes, okay, now that exercise is not about preservation and restoring, it's about, respect and, how do we, create the next layer of something that's beautiful, in this town or community.
Yeah.
And, maybe that's, nods to the past and picking up on, amassing and style and some materials that were, part of the history. Maybe that is, being thoughtful about being a good neighbor and how you're shedding light and, and that sort of thing to be a piece. But maybe then it's also about like, how do we create, new space? What does this generation do? What is the needs of travelers coming through, and how do we create something that hasn't been experienced before, that's for the next 100 years, because we're not designing. I mean, as much as you think about it, we're never designing for the last 100 years. We're designing for the next 100 years of people that are going to come and experience our communities and cities.
Ideally, yeah, we are designing for the next 100 years, and we don't even know what they're going to need. We're at the minimum are designing for the next 5 years, because it might take 2 years for the project to even come to life. And so then you're always that far in advance. And when it's commercial, it could be 3 to 5 that's going to take for it to be completed. So you're always looking at this evolving journey with the knowledge you have from the past and now, and then projecting a future. I was just looking through the stuff that they're doing with the Manchester United Old Trafford. I don't know whether you've had a look at it, but it's Foster and Partners. It's like what they're planning for that. It looks like a big kind of almost circus tent, but it's a whole. They're talking about building almost a city. It's not a city, but it's a precinct of all these things that can come into that space. And you go, right, so their vision is to, once they've got their people there, is to give them a bigger experience than just the game, or the opportunity for a bigger experience. And I think that this is the magic of architecture, is that you get this opportunity to envision something, and then when it's commercial, more how you want people to behave. When it's residential, you're more working closely with how they already behave and how they see themselves behaving in the future. I had a question when you were talking about Cherry Creek and the Plate River coming together there, and going back to the land whispering thoughts. And I go, so what would have happened if they'd taken sort of, the approach that Frank Lloyd Wright would have had, which was build adjacent to, and instead of like obviously the easiest place to build it was start building the city was right where that camp, that the Indians would use and all the rest. And if they'd gone, well, look, we're going to go 1 mile back or whatever it is, whatever back from that, and let's just always keep that river intersection and that point as a space, and we'll do all our business back here. And you would have had all the struggles of how do you get water there, all these other things. And I wonder what would happen if nowadays you went, look, we've got this rare opportunity to do something like this, and we're going to put it back here because we can make the infrastructure work for everything else.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a great, oftentimes the most important thing that an architect does is makes a choice, right? Of not necessarily what to do, but what not to do.
Yeah.
Is so much more important of what you leave in. And, and actually that intersection of Platte and Cherry Creek, they did preserve. And it's a really cool little beautiful park that a lot of the condos and, people that live downtown get to come down to, and they've got it into a little kayak park. There's bike paths that come along it on the
right.
West Side is this cool restored, it's an REI flagship building now, and you can, rent bikes and all this kind of stuff from there. So, it is one of those special nodes, and Denver didn't do everything right, but I think they did a pretty good job of preserving that little node and part of
I
the.
don't know downtown Denver very well. Like I've been multiple times, but generally just to head to the mountains. And is it Brown's Hotel?
There's a Brown's Palace. Is that what you're talking about? The Brown's Palace
Probably.
Hotel.
Yeah, yeah, Brown's
Great
Palace.
places for like whiskey and cigar. They got a cigar bar in the bottom.
I stayed in there for, oh goodness, I think about 4 days one time. Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I stayed in there and it would just been renovated. A part of it wasn't finished and other parts were. So a long time ago. And while we were there, we literally got snowed into Denver. I was with my girlfriend and we stayed there and it was like really fun. But we didn't get to explore that much because Denver got so much snow in the streets that year.
Oh yeah.
That we were like, yeah, it was like being in, New York after a snowstorm. And then we were up into the mountains and then we actually got snowed so heavily on the way back that all our flights and stuff got cancelled and yeah, like the planes couldn't.
Oh yeah, you got the full DIA experience. You had to have your flights canceled and been snowed in. Like you couldn't ask for it better.
Yeah, those were the days. Those were the days. I'd love you to tell me about, you can do either tell me something about your residential side of architecture that you do, or go straight to telling me about the hotel, and then I'll make you tell me about residential and how those two things inform each other is really what I'm interested in, because the hotel's beyond exciting. Like I'm super, super excited about that because it's of a place in a space and it's of something that nobody's done in there before. And so there's a whole story around, creating that. But then also how people say, so many clients of mine, and I know friends of mine and their clients want a hotel experience that is more residential than ever before. And they want a residential experience that is more hotel than ever before. It's like this mash that's coming together. And yeah, take me away.
Yeah. I'll go into the hotel because I was just kind of continuing the thought that we were talking about with layers of a city.
Yeah. So the hotel's Red Hotel for everybody listening, and it's not yet constructed. Did you turn dirt? Did you
sis? How about that? Like we've got the inside gutted, and I was in meetings this morning, just like negotiating out with city officials to let us go. We've got everybody like biting at the bit. So yeah, we're making slow grinding process to actually start this one, but all the building permits they were approved as of yesterday. We recorded the documents this morning. We had this last city official on transportation like checked off, just sitting on one person's desk, and she emailed me this morning this last little right away permit, and she said, "Yeah, I'll get to it next week." It's like next week. I emailed the mayor. I was like, "Chris, you gotta help." Just walk over to her desk and pull it off. So anyway, it's beyond the pain and suffering of getting permits.
We should be drinking whiskey and smoking cigars right now.
Yeah. The layering of a city, and why the Red Hotel and why that is special. So this is one of those towns that has a beautiful history and really has some beautiful elements. And a lot of ways has found itself not having the outlet that you need for fresh water and allowing for new life to come in. And so there has been almost a 2-year long conversation about this, about how do we respect the past? How do we bring something new in? What would be helpful for this city, for this place, and then what's the right thing to do for this particular spot? And looking at this city, what it really needed, it's got great little restaurants. It's adjacent to one of the world's most renowned outdoor amphitheaters. They have the traffic that comes through, almost 2 million people a year come through the little town. and I spend a lot of their efforts on traffic tickets and noise control, and kind of allowing people through and then back out. And rather than being, so opposed to that, how do we make that an amenity and an asset that the community can use, and how do we actually slow some of those tourists coming through to be able to stop and enjoy the restaurants, create space. And parking is a huge issue. It's an ongoing issue in a little town like this, and so it's not a easy solution to come in and say, let's do a big hotel, because there's no place to park in this town. And so we're creating a hotel without parking, which means it's really got to rely on Uber and car share and parking remote and bringing people in. But if you do that, if you kind of separate the car out and you just say, let's create a space that people can come and stay, and they know that's part of the deal, then that opens up the opportunity for them to start, spending money in local restaurants. That opens up the opportunity for, people without cars staying along parking along the streets and then going for hikes. If you come without a car, you're going to walk, and you're going to walk up to the concerts. You're going to walk up to the trails. And so we're taking a little bit of a bold move in doing that. And that'll be part of our guest expectations is, hey, this is a great place and experience. Leave your cars outside, come enjoy the space. And, we'll have shuttles and bikes and things like that you can, take and get around. And, we think that's going to open up a lot of great opportunity for the town. And, it's something that's needed. There's no hotels in town. There's no short-term rentals in town. I have all this traffic and through. And so, that was early,
I think it will slow the amount of traffic eventually as well. Like, are they likely to make any of it a walking mall or anything like that in the long-term future?
I think there's a lot of opportunity in this little town to start to create that walkability that would solve a lot of these problems. I mean, I think a parking garage needs to be in place where you come in and maybe you've got to park a little bit out and then walk in. So street enhancement, and they've been looking at this as, how do we create, safety barriers if you've got a lot of cars coming through, that you're separating, a walking path from streets and crosswalks. And so there's been a plan put in place to improve that walkability. But all these things kind of go together, and, it's interesting in a small town, like, one little building, has an important piece in the puzzle and a layer, and it's not going to solve all problems or change everything that's working.
It is going to elevate the conversation.
And it certainly has and does. And so this, sleepy little town is all over, the news and these conversations about, about parking and about, enhancing restaurant profitability and people to be able to come
just think of everything, like everybody, I say everybody, most people know the Red Rocks Amphitheater. They know this is where it is. It's right by the Red Rocks Amphitheater. You can walk to it from town. So the concerts, I think you said to me once, there's over 200 concerts or events there a year.
Yeah, 200 concerts a year. It was 1.4 million people that visit. And so all of a sudden it said, oh, well, we can go up, we can do something different. We can deal with the parking, and we'll have to get it built and shown. But we have gotten approved. But then that opens up the conversation of, the rest of the town. How do we begin to, put areas across the rest
all of a sudden the town becomes as big a tourist, not as big, but it becomes a tourist attraction just like the amphitheater is. Whereas at the moment it's the furthest up to the amphitheater. And you suddenly go, oh, hold on a second. This has got its own personality. It's like, meet Mary. This is Mary. This is what she has going on, and she's interesting as well. And people start to spend a little bit more time in that town. As you say, the restaurants prosper, the grocery stores prosper, the clothing stores will prosper, because it's not a drive-through anymore. It's actually a destination. And people go, oh, well, we'll spend a couple of days there, explore this stuff as well as go to the concert. It changes things so much.
It does. And so this idea of like, hospitality, how do you start to bring in this, space that's, rather than being known for traffic tickets and noise control, how do we create like, a good Texas front porch for, people
Yeah.
enjoy coming out and, having a cold beer and, spending
Just
time on a rooftop deck and, watching stars. And, you just kind of create those little moments that become really important. Like you think about the, important experience you have as a kid with your family. And, it is those, times out, where you got to gather, for us, like, around a campfire or a lake and, just spend, those moments. And so, how do you start to create spaces where it opens up to that? Like not often in a family these days are you actually traveling with your kids that you can put away the device, take a moment, enjoy a concert underneath the stars, come back, hang out on a rooftop, with a fire. And, it's those little moments that become some of the most important, like memories when you go back. And, like for me, going back to East Texas and those kind of nostalgic, like, oh, I remember, chasing those bullfrogs and, around the pond and, spending time with dad. And, it's I just start to create that in life experiences and travel, that, you just open up those opportunities to do and enjoy that. And
I
we
think
we
this is the fabric of who we become. And I look at the device world we live in, and I go, there's the doers and there's the watchers, and it's no different from sports. There's all these people that are yelling for the few people that are on the field. And do you want to be on the field, or do you want to actually be, or whether it's field or whatever it is, but do you actually want to be the doer, or do you want to be the watcher? And
Yeah.
the joy in life is being the doer at whatever level you can become a doer. For some people, it might be to experience, just being in a space like that and soaking it in, having their family around them. For somebody else, they got to jump out of a plane to get there. That's their gig. But it's actually giving that opportunity to be a doer as opposed to a watcher, like just observing everybody else doing stuff. And I don't think that separation's ever been as big as it is now. I think it's that we can watch so much that, where's the doers?
Yeah. So when COVID hit, and everything was shut down and we do luxury homes and the whole nine bit. But when all that, kind of was settled and we're all sitting at home, the real things that said, okay, are you sitting and waiting for somebody, or are you picking up a tool belt and are you building, the house over your house, or the tree houses out in the woods? Said, well, let's not wait for anybody. And so transitioning to residential, my wife and we bought this little lot that was across the way from us. And, said, well, if no one's hiring for architecture at the moment because the world shut down, let's go, build a tree
Be a
house.
doer.
Let's be a doer. Yeah, let's pull on the belt. And so, that was just like a beautiful season, because I had my boys were 15 and 16, and I wanted them to have the same opportunity to go out and just make your own stuff happen. And so
You would be your dad again.
It never
So wonderful.
you never stop looking in the mirror and saying, who is that guy? And he's looking back at you.
It's me.
Yeah.
But isn't that legacy? Isn't that legacy where, you're taking the moments that formed who you are and beyond that, and then creating the environment for your sons to actually be, to experience those moments in this moment, bring it forward, and to do all that same stuff. It's like, that's legacy to me. That's what creates tradition. It's what creates this incredible drive in humans to recognize their past. And then they look at their grandfather and go, shit, dad's just the same as his dad. What was his dad like? Crowd the laugh.
I was probably a pain in the ass to my dad back then, and my kid is a royal pain in the ass to me right now. And and one day he's gonna look back and say, oh, Dad, he wasn't so. Yeah, I'm just like him now. It's like, yeah,
Actually, I think it's fabulous. I know my dad's an artist, and he has some little quirky habit things that I've noticed over, like, I don't know. He's 96 now, and he's got Alzheimer's and stuff. So he still has his habits, but he used to put a rubber band around just about anything. So he'd have a bunch of pencils. He'd put them in a tin, and he'd put a rubber band around it. And I will be this. I'm doing the same shit. I'll pull a rubber band out of the drawer to put it around a block of cheese or something. I'm like, Adrian, what the hell is going on here, man? But that's that thing. I see that in what he did and what I do, and I go, okay, identify all the things that I thought were shit about what he did when I was a kid. So I've gone through and like identified those and gone, don't do those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And catch myself. Don't do those things, because it would be easy to do that as well. But
yeah.
I love
of your parents. Like, I said, you learn the most from them. And, 50% of what you learn is, what you want to do, that you like what they do. And the other 50% is, you learn just as well. We're not going to do that. And it's every now and then it's like, you hand the baton off, and, you see like, okay, that's a piece of me that's going forward, but they're doing it better. And you can say, okay, that's awesome. Like, I want my kid to do the same thing of like, hey, take what you love, and you can put apart, the things that you thought were shit. And that's, that's the way of passing on the baton between father and son. And, I've done it. He's going to do it.
Yeah.
When we were,
so you built this little place, you built a place there.
So during COVID, we built this kind of house in the trees, big timbers and logs and, hot tubs and, cool, like all of the kind of like dream things you have when you're a little kid, but you have, no skill or no money if you scale it up as an adult. And, it was for us, a chance to pull those like kid nostalgic things. We had done small tree houses as kids out in the woods, did the bigger one that I saw with my dad on the camp, and then created, this one that, really got us into hospitality, because we turned it into a short-term rental, and they got to see the whole entrepreneurial, experience of creating something that then you could give back out to the world, and so create those moments, those families to experience. And
do you have photos of it that you can share?
Yeah, sure.
Let me go more. I'd love to see this, and we can talk through some of these, but we still want to make sure we've got time to talk through the Red Rocks Hotel, or the Red Hotel at Red Rocks, and just that piece as well. But yeah, you've got screen shares. So remember, if you're on just listening to this, you can jump on YouTube. You'll be able to see what we're sharing here. The other thing that you can do when you jump on YouTube, or even on any podcast platform, is Radical Hospitality is the name of Zeke's podcast, and it's a really cool podcast as well. So if you go and look up Radical Hospitality, that is really cool. Really cool. You'll learn lots. It's fabulous. So we're going to get a lot of pictures here.
Can you see my screen now?
I can see a bunch of pictures. And then there's a black bear treehouse. Oh, wow. Check this out.
Yeah. So there's our little treehouse.
But describe what's going on here, because people who can't see it, you're going to have to tell them the story.
Of course. So in the left-hand side, you'll see this kind of, wrangly ponderosa, Douglas fir that kind of curls up. And if you see right up in the top, there's actually a couple of boards that are up here. And so this whole lot was like a really thick wooded lot. And we'd always watch all the elk and bears and wildlife in this woods. And my kids would come down. And before this was open and cleared up like this, it was a deep, dark woods, and this was their little tree house. So they built a ladder up here. It was super sketchy, and they had a little tree house up in the top. And so when the opportunity came for us to buy the land, we said, all right, well, what can we do that we can preserve, all the wildlife coming through here, and not do something that's, a big McMansion that we had to look at, but still, could pay for the lot, could be a cool experience. And so we just did an addition, to this the
tree house, to the original structure.
And so you can see there's kind of two giant beams that come off, and essentially there's a tree anchor that goes in, and the tree supports a little bit of the weight, and then there's
how do you do that? How do you let a house essentially be supported by a growing what do you say to the engineer? Like, it's like
so there's actually a guy that's done a lot of benefit to the Treehouse community. His name's Peter Nelson. And so he's actually gone through and designed several special anchors that allow for the movement of the tree to still continue to grow and move. And one of the interesting things on a mature tree is they actually at some point don't continue to move up. And so you can have
they just get thicker.
They just get thicker and they grow out, and the tree from the top is moving up. But if you put an anchor into a tree, that anchor won't move in elevation. Now the tree will sway side to side, and movement's not a good thing for buildings. And so, these anchors are designed with a slot in it that allows the tree to still move, and then you design whatever attachment to give the tree some room to grow out.
Right.
And so, these have a weighted weight that they can carry, and so a third is carried by the two trees, and then 2/3 are carried by these big thick 12 by 12 posts that seem to kind of sit lightly, and they go down underneath ground to some big massive concrete pillars that we put in.
Sure.
And then from there, it kind of floats above, and so. It's what's great about this is it still allows wildlife and things to move down below. You still get elk and all that, and the turkeys coming through here.
They'll wander through the downstairs.
Oh, right through. Yeah, like pretty much in the morning in the fall, like we'll get elk running right underneath here, and it's a great experience if you're staying in the treehouse because you're kind of up in this perch, and you can look out below and. We nearly always have deer or elk or turkey or something, one.
I love that. I love that. Just for anybody who's not looking on YouTube, go and have a look. You can see here, like it's clear space underneath the whole house. And there's some furniture and stuff down there, but there's totally clear space. There's the tree that's holding, or the trees that are holding up the house. And then you've got 2 stories above that. So overall, it's a 3-story structure. But the living that you're going to do in this house, or the staying that you're going to do in here, is above the ground. So you've got this corridor underneath, which doesn't stop anything. There's no closure on it. There's a staircase. That's it. And a fireplace.
Yeah. So great project, fun. And, and it's a moment in the space. And really, again, like that got us into kind of the hospitality space, and we've done a number of other since, but I'll just share some images of the hotel getting ready to do. And, really once you start to get your mind around, one, 500 square foot treehouse, and you can look at then you can just start to multiply that up. We did another project that was 10 tree houses and some RV spots, and you start to understand the repetition of that. In our mind, then it's just taking, one tree house and doing 22 keys, and it's a little easier to manage and maintain those into a boutique hotel. And so that kind of led down the journey of this. And we thought originally, okay, let's create a space that we could use as an office, and then we'll have some short-term rentals up above it. And as we developed out the project and started putting together math and numbers, we realized more and more, you need more keys to make a project work. And we needed less space than what we thought we would need. And so we moved ourselves out and built a little home studio. And most of my meetings with clients in a coffee shop. And so we put a little coffee shop on the bottom. So my office now has always been home, coffee shop. And, so this will be kind of the gathering space where, we'll have kind of this
will be
experiential hospitality, and then you'll get to we can meet and have a cup of coffee for my personal desire. So this is what we're doing. This is the rooftop deck.
Yeah, awesome.
To hang out and enjoy the outdoors. And you can see each room. Kind of the idea with the rooms is that we want to put a touch of, that unique Colorado experience. And so each room will do a theme. This is the Elk Meadow room where
Oh, you get a theme each room as well?
yeah,
Sort of a bit like the that hotel in San Luis Obispo, the Madonna Inn.
Yeah. And
I like
I'm just
this
so like,
idea,
hey,
yeah.
when you come and you stay here, you shouldn't feel like you're in any Marriott. You should feel like, hey, this is part of the space. I mean, these are the local areas and trails, and so we want people to be able to experience that and
Yeah, wow.
have a warm place together around a fireplace, part of the street. So
Yeah, that's fun. That's fun. I really love the fact that you give people an opportunity to come and experience the same place in a different way by having your different rooms. That I don't know for listeners who's gone and stayed at the Madonna Inn in San Luis Obispo, but that is one of those things you go, oh, am I going to go to the Mountain Man room? Am I going to go to the cave room? Am I going to go to the whatever it is? Like it's always an adventure to go and stay there. And then something I'm seeing a lot happen in the hospitality space, like you're saying, is that, oh, well, last time we stayed in this room and now we're staying in this room. And the experience it delivers is in the overall is similar, but then the room creates its own magic and its own story, and it's curated that way. Again, it's a different personality.
And part of our forward partners, like we're all big outdoorsmen, outdoors women, and so we've kind of said, all right, we've got 4 partners, everybody take 5 rooms, and create the very best that you love about this area, and create that experience for the guests to come in. And so what are the maps? What are the guidebooks of your trails? What are the, unique experience that should be in that room? And, without like completely changing up each space, it really should be that. Like, hey, when you come and stay here, if you know about, the secret ice cream shop that's, on the corner, and make sure to get, tip Rachel, because, she'll tell you about, the best combination with the coffee, and create a great affogato. Go, and here's a coupon, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, those are the kind of things where, you can change from just a stay to an experience.
Yeah, 100%. I look, to me, preaching to the converted. I think it's almost like you become, you give them a unique experience with a local guide that isn't with them. And
and look, the guide might be the Joe at the bicycle shop. If you go down and ask him for the best trails, he'll tell you where to stop and start, and he can probably give you a shuttle if you need. Tell him Zeke sent you. That becomes your guide. It's not like you need a guide service. You just need to know where the locals go.
Yeah, you just need an inside run. You just need somebody's got your back, and they're guiding you through this sort of experience. Yeah, that's so cool, man. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's what people come and stay longer for. Is because they can
and come
experience, and come back. Yeah, they'll come for the concerts because that's already in place. But then they'll come back and go, oh wow, okay, we've got to try that. There's only 22 rooms, is that right?
Yeah. And like I said, when I came almost as a tourist from Texas and moved to Colorado, I was like a kid with the biggest backyard ever, because every weekend I was out on different trails, or skiing, or climbing, or kayaking, or fishing, and it's like the journey doesn't end. And so many places you can go, and it's kind of the one song wonder. One of the beautiful things about Colorado is you can go down any rabbit trail that you want, and there's a million chances for adventure. There's a really cool I was on Netflix right now. There's this series that was put out about treasure hunting, and a guy buried a treasure in the Rocky Mountains somewhere, and he publicized a book with some clues in the book poem on how to find this $1 million treasure that's buried in the mountains. And it inspired hundreds of people to go out into the mountains and the woods and seek this adventure. And I think the reason why it was so popular is we all have this innate desire to get out and explore, and you kind of just need those little pushes or hints or reasons to get through that.
I love that. I'm going to go and look that up. Like that to me is, I'm trying to think what it's called, but there's this worldwide organization where we used to be members of it. I can't think what it's called, but you go and you find things in different towns and cities, and like it'll be hidden and you got to find it. And then it will be like a little tin box or whatever, and it will have some stuff in there. And then you sign off on your piece of paper, and you can take something and leave something or whatever the rules are for that specific spot. And we used to do it with our kids. And sometimes you would be in the woods, and other times you'd be like in the heart of Melbourne City or just wherever. And it's global. I wish I could think of what the name of it is. And it was like a really fun thing to do, to go somewhere and then go, look, we've got an afternoon. Let's go and find this thing and discover the journey of having a purpose to go and find it, but discover the journey of, whether it's coffee shops or parks or these things along the way that we wouldn't have otherwise done. I was going to say, was it D.B. Cooper? Was it D.B. Cooper, the famous story of the guy who robbed the bank or whatever, or ransom, and he flew and he jumped out of the aeroplane? It's something like D.B. Cooper. If you look it up, somebody, guests, please write in and tell us. There's a famous story, American story, where this guy got $1 million or something, and he parachuted out over the woods, and they were all marked notes, and they've never been gone back into circulation. But he parachuted out of a plane as his escape into the forest somewhere, and whether he died or whatever. And I wish I could remember it, because I went to a bar that was named after him. I think it's D.B. Cooper, but I went to a bar that was named after him, and I'm trying to even remember what city that was in. And I remember I already knew the story, saw the name, and went, "Oh, we've got to go there." And had a very messy night in that bar. Had a lot of fun, and it was all around the legend of the story of the guy who robbed the bank or robbed whatever, ransomed or whatever. And and that's a treasure hunting thing. People have searched for that
treasure to get you out and to connect the dots, do things. And again, when I go back and think about like my architectural journey, a lot of it has just been about how do you get back to that adventure and place where you are outdoors and you're enjoying the those spaces of discovery. And I did that a lot with the urban architecture. I always talked about connecting the indoors out, and we would do these big glass doors and make outdoor spaces. And I think that's wonderful, and we still do that. But hospitality is such a fun space to explore, because it really becomes this game where you can open up the doors even more, and you can start to not only think about different people experiencing the same place. We're talking about you have a home that's kind of designed around what that person already does, and creating that space for them, or a public space like a hotel or a hospitality landscape hotel is less about the individual, but how do you create that experience for the individual, so they're going and exploring and getting connected to the places that you go. And to me, that's really the essence of the projects, is how do you make those spaces that really almost force people to go out and explore and get to know a community. And maybe there's these beautiful small towns in East Texas, maybe they're small little communities in Morrison, maybe it's Australia.
Well, look at what's happened with Marfa, Texas. As an artist community, there's a perfect example of it. Those kinds of things. I think that's what makes magic. So when the Red Hotel's built, what's your next big, audacious, hairy project that you're going to take on? What's in your vision board?
Yeah, definitely on the vision board, is a larger landscape hotel. I really like the idea, and we've started working on a couple of these where they are structures kind of clustered in. Like one is on a coffee farm in the Dominican Republic. Another is this project down in East Texas. But once we ourselves get the hotel up and done, we're working through and working with clients right now on these types of projects. And I always look at, every time we do a client project, it's a great place for us to learn and experiment before we go and do it ourselves. And so I think we'll get through the Red Hotel, and we'll start to look for a space that we can either partner with someone or do that ourselves in terms of a larger landscape hotel. So yeah, that's one. Personally, we're going to it's our 25th anniversary, and we're going to Spain this year.
Whereabouts?
Around in Barcelona, and then kind of around the Mediterranean. So we're going to spend a little time down there. We've got some friends that are doing some hospitality investments that we're going to look at.
What dates are you headed there? Just I'm looking at being there as well. So, and I've got some people that you could catch up with.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we'll be there, and we're beginning of June, so the first 2 weeks of June.
Early June. Okay.
Yeah.
I won't be there then, but I'll be there later.
All right.
Yeah, but there's some people I'll hook you up with. I mean, one of the beautiful things, you've got your own podcast. There's the connections that you make globally out of having a podcast. And one of my friends in Barcelona, Johannes Wortman, is a hotelier. He's designed a number of hotels in Barcelona, stuff like that. Very, very generous, wonderful architect. And I've been guided through Barcelona with him. Yeah, amazing. And our friend Peter Tui, Peter and I were with him, and just his knowledge of Barcelona and his love of architecture and history and then experiences. Yeah, you'll enjoy.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, love to connect with them. And of course, this, podcast, I mean, we're relatively new. I haven't been doing it as long as you, but Radical Hospitality has been incredibly, fun and insightful, having these kind of conversation with people, all over the world in this space of creating cool and unique things. So, I think that is definitely forefront of, continuing those cool conversations and helping people get into this space and experience, designing and developing, their own unique states.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love doing an Airbnb for people, I love that thing of creating something that's unique for them as well. I've got one last question. Your favorite space in your own home. This is off the emotional floor plan. So I like land whispering. I also have an emotional floor plan. And with it, your favorite space. And you know what? You can choose the treehouse if you want. That I need to get right down to sort of like, what is it? What's the space that is your favorite, and what's the emotional word that you would use to describe it?
Yeah, no, I'm sitting in it. So over the last, 5-6 years, I've been testing out, different architectural spaces, renting offices, working at the dining table and, around kids, and, really was excited this last year to, not have an office shared with a bunch of people. I decided that was not the ideal, for me to work and concentrate. Really loved the podcast, and so wanted a space that I could close off, be able to have these conversations. I added a treadmill in here, although I'm an outdoor runner and I love doing the mountains, and pretty consistent about it during the summer. I'm still a Texan, a little fair weather in the winter. And I noticed like in the winter, I was not getting it done. So, having like that reminder, I get up every morning and I'll get my, 30, 45 minutes in on it to be able to, hop on our team call with our team, little couch in the back to be able to, take a night nap, or, my art studio. I built her this space out next to us. We'll come in and have chats. I had a great window out to the treehouse in the meadow. And so, love being up here, seeing, I got foxes and elk and deer and all that kind of stuff, out behind me. And so, that's my happy place is being up here in the mountains, being close enough to the family that I'm very involved with my kids and their life and school. I can, the way the world has evolved, most client meetings are either Zoom or coffee shop. So, down meeting, people, at local coffee shops if I need. Our team is remote and has the flexibility. So this is really kind of the perfect space for me and where my life is right now. So really
I love that. If you had to use one emotional word, what would it be?
And just peaceful. It's like,
Peaceful.
I can look out and see trees and mountains. No matter what chaos is going on, you can kind of look above the storm and, no, life's good. We're blessed.
I love that. I love that. I love the fact that you've got your touch points in there as well. Those pieces that make the difference. With that space, if you know that it brings you peace, and it also brings you your kind of creative energy as well. If you were building a new home, would you build the same space again, or what would you add to it or take away from it that it has now?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, like I designed another home to go over on that Treehouse lot, and we were looking at it. Do we go ahead and build another house and then rent this one out? And we really love a lot of things about this house, particularly our studio, which is my wife has an art studio. My son is big into leather and crafting.
Oh, really?
My other son does woodworking. We're just kind of an artistic family, and so having that kind of creative space where I'm connected in the studio, but can disconnect and close it off for client calls and podcasts is important. And so we took all of those components. We brought it over there. Rather than having the studio on ground level, we put it up. We called it the Eagle Nest. And so being up in the trees and the views, I think would be fun. It's more appropriate for that site where the views are a little higher as well. So that was the kind of the change that we made in the new house design. I don't know if we're gonna build it. Looking at the financials of current interest rates and costs, we said, all right, well, let's pay this house off first, and then we'll think about do we build that one over there?
Yeah.
But
if somebody else wants that house, wants a house like that, give Zeke a call and ask if you can see that plan, and then see what he would do for you. That would be my advice. Is if that all resonates with you and you're a listener and you go, oh, this is something I want a house that does those things, and what would it need to be for me? Then you've got a blueprint that has been very well thought out to start with. Zeke, fantastic, man. I really, really enjoyed this. I can't wait. I want to know what's the date that we're partying at the opening of the Red Hotel.
All right.
Do you got to hold me to its own life? Construction. Where's that shot?
In the year of 26, we'll be having a beer together up on that rooftop deck. So
around what month? Am I skiing?
Oh,
or am I skiing? And also, what's the concert schedule so that we can take in a concert as well?
All right. Yeah, on the safe side, you'll be skiing. On the worst side, you'll be it'll be summer, and you'll be watching a great band. So I'm not gonna jinx it and tie it to a date yet, because I've seen what that's done for me the last 2 years. We're gonna just keep plowing forward.
It always makes a liar out of you, doesn't it? It always makes a liar. What I would love to do is, as that hotel comes together, and maybe that in a parallel project that you're doing, it would be fun to kind of do some case study stuff, because you've done the hard work on the hotel. I say that like you've done the massive foundation work that needs to happen to even just be allowed. And that's one story. And now you've got the story where actually everything that they've said yes to, somehow you've got to get that done next. And the architect's journey, especially when it goes into the GC's journey to create the thing, is another shift of outcomes and complexities and changing things, and the way what you learn as you go without making major changes is always so incredible. So I'm super keen if you want to keep touching back, and we'll do something, on a quarterly or something, and go, here's where we're at, man.
For sure.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
That'd be really fun.
Well, definitely. Well, we'd love to have you again on the Radical Hospitality, and I'm happy to come on anytime.
Yeah.
I always enjoy having a conversation with you, Adrian. And you can
Likewise.
follow us a little bit on Instagram, is where we're posting a lot of our story and projects. So that's at Zeke Freeman _root architecture is our handle. So you can
We'll post all that with show notes and everything else as well, and so everybody will know how to get in contact with you. And I'm looking forward to coming and playing and bringing one of my architectural tours there as well. And we only usually bring around 12. Our groups are 12 to 16, so we might even be able to nearly rent out the hotel.
Absolutely.
And come and put a concert in there as well, and bring one of those experiences, and then go and do some cool stuff in the mountains or on those trails with Feast Experiences. And the guys who also operate with Feast Experiences, they are movie makers as well as, and don't make food. The feast is the feast of food and conversation and people, and then the architectural experiences is what I add to that. But they're in Denver as well. So
love it.
Well, I'll introduce you to those guys as well. They're really, really cool.
Awesome, man. Well, I gotta go get my kid. This has been fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Cheers, man. Take care. Bye. Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, and please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.